What if I told you that wearing England's most powerful crown could become a woman's greatest nightmare? Behind the glittering palaces, priceless jewels, and royal celebrations was a world ruled by fear, secrets, and impossible expectations. Every queen lived under the same silent pressure, to produce an heir, protect her family, and survive a court where one mistake could destroy everything. History remembers their crowns, but it often forgets the sacrifices hidden beneath them. Tonight, we're stepping beyond the royal portraits to uncover the untold reality of Tudor queens, the women who held immense power, yet lived with constant uncertainty. Their lives were filled with ambition, betrayal, love, heartbreak, and choices that changed the course of England forever. Once you discover what truly happened behind the palace walls, you'll never look at the Tudor dynasty the same way again.
The year was 1485. England had finally emerged from decades of brutal civil war known as the Wars of the Roses. The kingdom was exhausted. Noble families had fought each other for generations, leaving behind a nation desperate for peace and stability. When a new royal dynasty came to power, many believed a brighter future had finally arrived. But inside the magnificent royal palaces, a different battle was only beginning, one that would be fought not with swords, but with duty, expectation, and survival. To the outside world, the Tudor court looked like a place of endless luxury. Towering castles, golden chandeliers, embroidered gowns, elaborate feasts, and grand ceremonies created the image of perfect royal life. Yet behind those elegant walls existed a world where every smile could hide suspicion, every compliment might conceal ambition, and every conversation could change someone's fate overnight. For the women who entered this royal world, life was carefully planned long before they reached adulthood. From childhood, noble daughters were educated in languages, music, dancing, religion, etiquette, and diplomacy. They learned how to behave with grace, how to speak with confidence, and how to represent powerful families. But beneath all of these lessons stood one expectation above every other: to strengthen the dynasty through marriage and secure its future with children. The moment a young noblewoman entered the royal court, she became part of a dangerous political game. Every friendship was observed. Every conversation was remembered. Every gesture could be interpreted in dozens of different ways. Trust became one of the rarest treasures inside the palace because loyalty often changed as quickly as power itself. The court was filled with influential nobles, ambitious advisors, foreign ambassadors, and servants who quietly carried information from one room to another. Rumors traveled faster than official announcements, and even the smallest misunderstanding could grow into a serious accusation. A single careless remark might end a promising future. One wrong alliance could place an entire family in danger. As months passed, the greatest pressure always focused on one question that echoed through every royal chamber. Would the Queen provide a healthy male heir? The future of the kingdom seemed to depend on that single answer. Every pregnancy became a matter of national importance. Every birth was watched with enormous anticipation. Success brought celebrations across the kingdom, while disappointment created uncertainty, anxiety, and endless speculation. Yet these women were far more than symbols of motherhood. Many possessed remarkable intelligence, political awareness, and emotional resilience. They learned to navigate one of Europe's most unpredictable courts while balancing personal happiness with public responsibility. Some quietly influenced important political decisions. Others became trusted advisors behind closed doors. A few even shaped the future of England in ways history rarely acknowledges. Despite their influence, their personal freedom remained extremely limited. Their clothing, friendships, daily routines, religious practices, and even private emotions were constantly observed. Every decision they made reflected not only upon themselves but upon the reputation of the entire royal family. Living inside the palace meant accepting that privacy no longer existed. Centuries later, we often admire beautiful portraits of Tudor queens dressed in magnificent fabrics, sparkling jewels, and elaborate crowns. Those paintings project confidence and authority, but they cannot reveal the sleepless nights, silent fears, heartbreaking losses, or impossible choices hidden behind each carefully painted face. Every crown carried extraordinary weight, and every royal title demanded sacrifices few people could truly imagine. This is not simply a story about queens. It is a story about women trying to survive in one of history's most demanding royal courts. It is about ambition challenged by duty, love tested by politics, and courage displayed in moments when failure could mean losing everything. And this is only the beginning. In the next chapter, we'll meet a young noblewoman whose destiny was shaped long before she understood the meaning of power. Raised to serve the crown, she would one day wear it herself, but the price of becoming England's queen would be far greater than anyone could have imagined. Long before she ever wore a crown, her future had already been decided. Born into a noble family, she understood from an early age that personal dreams mattered far less than political alliances. Every lesson she received, every public appearance she made, and every word she spoke prepared her for one purpose: to strengthen the kingdom through marriage. As she grew older, life inside the royal court became increasingly complex. The palace was not simply a home for the royal family, it was the center of English politics. Every noble sought influence. Every foreign ambassador watched for opportunities. Every servant carried stories from one chamber to another. Even silence could be interpreted as a political statement. When she finally married the king, the entire kingdom celebrated. Church bells echoed across England, magnificent feasts lasted for days, and poets praised the union as the beginning of a glorious new era. To ordinary people, it looked like the perfect royal romance. But behind the celebrations stood enormous expectations that could never be ignored. From the very first day of marriage, one question followed the new queen everywhere she went. Would she give England a prince? It was a burden unlike anything most people could imagine. Every physician, priest, nobleman, and foreign diplomat quietly waited for news that could determine the future of the Tudor dynasty. The queen herself had little control over the endless pressure. Her health became a matter of national importance, and every small detail of her daily life attracted attention. When she finally announced her first pregnancy, excitement spread throughout the kingdom. Streets filled with celebration. Churches held special prayers. Merchants decorated their shops, believing England's future was finally secure. Months passed with growing anticipation as everyone imagined the arrival of the long-awaited heir. But history often refuses to follow human expectations. The birth brought both joy and uncertainty. Although the child was welcomed with love, whispers quickly spread throughout the court. Some celebrated openly, while others quietly questioned what would happen if a male heir never arrived. Those private conversations slowly changed the atmosphere inside the palace. As years passed, each new pregnancy carried even greater emotional weight. Hope returned with every announcement and faded with every disappointment. The queen remained calm in public, smiling through ceremonies and royal appearances. Yet behind closed doors she carried fears that few people could understand. The king also found himself under growing pressure. Advisors constantly reminded him that the stability of the kingdom depended upon securing the succession. Foreign rulers watched England closely, waiting to see whether political uncertainty might weaken the Tudor dynasty. Every passing year increased the tension surrounding the royal family. Meanwhile, life inside the palace became even more dangerous. Powerful nobles formed secret alliances. Some supported the queen without question. Others quietly searched for alternatives should the royal marriage fail to produce the future they desired. Every banquet became an opportunity for political negotiation. Every dance, every conversation, and every invitation carried hidden meaning. The queen quickly learned that survival required more than kindness. She had to remain patient, observant, and emotionally strong. She listened carefully before speaking. She chose her friends wisely. She understood that one careless decision could destroy years of trust. Despite the constant pressure, she earned respect throughout the kingdom. Ordinary people admired her generosity toward the poor, her dedication to religious life, and her calm dignity during difficult times. She visited churches, supported charitable causes, and treated many members of her household with kindness. These actions strengthened her popularity even when political uncertainty surrounded the crown. Yet popularity could not silence ambition. As new faces arrived at court, competition quietly intensified. Younger noblewomen attracted attention, ambitious advisors whispered new possibilities into the king's ear, and foreign diplomats carefully observed every change in the royal household. What appeared to be ordinary social gatherings often concealed struggles for influence that could reshape the future of England. The Queen sensed that the palace itself was changing. Familiar faces disappeared. Trusted friends accepted new positions or quietly withdrew from court. Conversations became shorter. Smiles became less sincere. Even those who had once pledged absolute loyalty began choosing their words more carefully. Without realizing it, England stood at the edge of one of the greatest turning points in its history. The decisions made over the next few years would transform not only the royal family but also the country's religion, politics, and future for generations to come. And in the next chapter, an unexpected young woman would arrive at court. Someone whose intelligence, confidence, and quiet ambition would capture the attention of the king himself, setting in motion events that would change English history forever. The arrival of a new lady at court rarely attracted much attention. Noble families regularly sent their daughters to serve the Queen, hoping they would gain experience, build important connections, and perhaps secure an advantageous marriage. But this young woman was different. She was intelligent, well-educated, confident, and unlike many around her, she was not easily intimidated by the glitter and power of the royal court. Having spent years in the sophisticated courts of continental Europe, she returned to England with refined manners, a sharp mind, and an understanding of politics far beyond her age. She spoke several languages, enjoyed music and literature, and carried herself with remarkable confidence. While others competed to be noticed, she allowed her intelligence to speak for itself. At first, she was simply another member of the Queen's household. No one imagined that her presence would eventually shake the foundations of an entire kingdom. The king had ruled for many years and carried the enormous responsibility of protecting the Tudor dynasty. Although respected across Europe, one concern continued to overshadow every success: the uncertain future of the royal succession. Advisors debated possible solutions behind closed doors, foreign rulers watched every development with interest, and rumors spread through London almost daily. As the king encountered the young noblewoman more frequently, conversations that began politely gradually became longer and more personal. Unlike many who surrounded the monarch, she challenged ideas with confidence and spoke with unusual honesty. Her wit, education, and determination made her impossible to ignore. The royal court noticed immediately. Servants whispered in corridors. Ambassadors quietly reported developments back to their own kings. Noble families watched carefully, wondering whether a simple friendship might become something much more significant. The Queen remained dignified in public, continuing her charitable work and fulfilling every royal duty expected of her. She attended ceremonies, welcomed foreign guests, and appeared beside the king whenever required. Yet beneath the calm surface, everyone sensed that the atmosphere inside the palace had begun to change. The court became divided. Some believed the king should remain loyal to his queen regardless of political difficulties. Others argued that the future of England demanded difficult decisions. Their opinions were rarely spoken openly, but private meetings grew more frequent, and secret alliances became increasingly important. The young noblewoman soon discovered that admiration could be as dangerous as hostility. Every dress she wore attracted discussion. Every smile inspired speculation. Every appearance beside the king fueled new rumors across the kingdom. She had entered the palace as an ordinary lady-in-waiting, but now every eye followed her movements. Meanwhile, the king faced a dilemma unlike any before. His personal feelings had become deeply connected to matters of national importance. Any decision he made would affect not only his family but also England's relationships with powerful European kingdoms and the authority of the Church itself. Seeking a peaceful solution, the king hoped that religious authorities would approve the end of his marriage so he could begin a new chapter. But the situation proved far more complicated than anyone expected. Months turned into years. Negotiations continued. Letters crossed Europe. Powerful church leaders debated the issue. Foreign rulers applied pressure from every direction. The uncertainty frustrated everyone involved. Inside England, ordinary people struggled to understand what was happening. Some supported the king's desire to secure the succession. Others believed that breaking a royal marriage threatened both tradition and religion. Conversations filled marketplaces, churches, taverns, and village squares as the kingdom became increasingly divided. The young woman at the center of the controversy lived under extraordinary pressure. Every decision she made was judged. Every rumor damaged her reputation further. Supporters praised her intelligence and determination, while critics blamed her for a crisis that reached far beyond her control. Yet she refused to disappear. She remained confident, believing that history favored those willing to accept extraordinary risks. Her patience seemed endless, but every passing year raised the stakes. By now, the disagreement was no longer simply about one marriage. It had become a conflict between royal authority and religious power, a confrontation that would permanently reshape England's future. No one inside the palace could fully imagine how dramatic the consequences would become. Because in the next chapter, the king would make a decision so bold that it would break centuries of tradition, separate England from the authority of Rome, and change the course of British history forever. One royal marriage was about to trigger a revolution that reached far beyond the palace walls. The decision that followed would become one of the most dramatic turning points in English history. After years of negotiations, unanswered requests, and growing frustration, the king reached a conclusion that few people believed possible. Instead of waiting for permission from religious authorities abroad, he chose a path that would forever change the relationship between the English crown and the church. It was a bold move. It was a dangerous move. And it would reshape the future of an entire nation. Royal advisors worked tirelessly behind closed doors, drafting new laws that transferred religious authority from distant leaders to the English monarch himself. Parliament debated the proposals, bishops argued over their consequences, and noble families quietly chose sides. When the changes were finally announced, shock spread throughout Europe. For centuries, England had recognized the authority of the Pope in Rome. Now, for the first time, the king declared that the English crown would stand above all religious matters within the kingdom. To many, it was nothing short of a revolution. Supporters celebrated what they saw as national independence. They believed England should govern its own affairs without interference from foreign powers. Others, however, viewed the decision as a dangerous break with centuries of tradition and faith. Families found themselves divided. Friends argued. Priests faced impossible choices. Across towns and villages, ordinary people struggled to understand what these changes meant for their daily lives. Meanwhile, inside the royal palace, preparations quietly began for a new royal marriage. The young noblewoman who had spent years waiting now stood on the edge of becoming England's new queen. Her coronation was unlike any before it. Magnificent processions filled London's streets. Church bells rang across the city. Crowds gathered to witness history unfolding before their eyes. Dressed in breathtaking robes embroidered with gold and precious jewels, she walked confidently toward the throne, fully aware that millions of eyes were watching. At that moment, she had achieved what few believed possible. She was now Queen of England. But wearing the crown did not end her challenges. In many ways, they had only just begun. The kingdom expected immediate results. The court expected stability. The king expected an heir. Every day brought renewed pressure. Every month increased expectations. Every pregnancy announcement became headline news across Europe. When the Queen finally gave birth, excitement swept through the kingdom once again. Royal messengers carried the joyful news across England. Bonfires were lit in celebration, and church bells echoed through cities and villages alike. The child was healthy, strong, intelligent. But there was one detail that disappointed many members of the court. The baby was a daughter. Although the king publicly celebrated the birth, many advisors quietly worried about the future once again. The dynasty still lacked the male heir everyone considered essential for long-term stability. The queen remained hopeful. She believed more children would follow. She devoted herself to raising the young princess while continuing her royal responsibilities. Yet time was not on her side. Each passing year increased political pressure. Every unsuccessful pregnancy strengthened the whispers spreading through the palace corridors. Some nobles questioned whether history was repeating itself. Others began searching for new opportunities. The atmosphere grew colder. Even trusted advisors started changing their loyalties. The Queen noticed the difference immediately. Conversations suddenly ended when she entered a room. Old friends became distant. Servants avoided eye contact. The warmth that had surrounded her coronation slowly disappeared. Then another young woman appeared at court. She was quiet, respectful, gentle. Unlike the ambitious personalities often seen inside the palace, she attracted attention without seeking it. At first, almost no one considered her important. But history has a remarkable habit of hiding its greatest turning points inside ordinary moments. The king began noticing her. Simple conversations became regular meetings. Court gossip returned with renewed intensity. Foreign ambassadors once again filled their reports with speculation about the royal household. The Queen understood exactly what was happening. She had once been the young woman everyone talked about. Now she found herself watching history repeat itself, but from the opposite side. The palace became filled with uncertainty. Every smile felt forced. Every ceremony became uncomfortable. Every royal appearance hid growing tension beneath carefully practiced expressions. The woman who had once changed England forever now faced the terrifying possibility that she, too, could be replaced. And unlike the Queen before her, the consequences awaiting her would be far more dangerous. Because in the next chapter, suspicion would replace trust, accusations would replace loyalty, and one of history's most famous queens would discover that wearing the crown offered no protection from the executioner's sword. By the late 1530s, the atmosphere inside the royal court had become darker than ever before. The palace that had once celebrated the Queen's rise was now filled with whispers, suspicion, and fear. Every servant seemed to know a different rumor. Every noble had an opinion. And every day, the Queen found herself surrounded by fewer people she could truly trust. The king had changed. The energetic ruler who once admired her intelligence and determination now appeared distant and impatient. Meetings grew shorter. Public appearances together became less frequent. Even during grand ceremonies, those watching closely could sense the growing distance between them. The greatest disappointment remained unchanged. England still had no surviving male heir. Although the young princess was healthy and deeply loved by her mother, many powerful advisors continued to believe that the future of the Tudor dynasty depended on the birth of a son. Their concerns slowly transformed into dangerous political conversations. At court, ambition never slept. Those who had once praised the Queen now began protecting their own futures. Powerful ministers recognized that royal favor could change overnight, and they carefully positioned themselves on the winning side before any final decision was made. One advisor in particular became increasingly influential. Calm, intelligent, and remarkably patient, he understood that controlling information could be more powerful than commanding an army. Instead of open confrontation, he allowed rumors to spread naturally, knowing they would eventually weaken the Queen's position without drawing attention to himself. Soon, stories began circulating throughout the palace. Some claimed the Queen had become arrogant. Others questioned her loyalty. A few whispered about secret friendships that crossed the boundaries of proper court behavior. Most of these stories had little evidence behind them, yet in a court built upon suspicion, rumors often became accepted as truth long before facts were examined. The Queen tried to ignore the growing hostility. She focused on her daughter. She attended official ceremonies. She continued fulfilling every public duty expected of England's Queen. But privately, she understood that something was changing. Friends who once visited her chambers regularly now stayed away. Servants answered cautiously. Letters arrived less frequently. The palace no longer felt like home. Then came the arrests. One by one, several gentlemen connected to the Queen were suddenly taken into custody. The accusations shocked the entire kingdom. They were accused of secret relationships with the Queen and of conspiring against the king himself. The news spread across London with incredible speed. Markets fell silent. Churches filled with worried conversations. Even foreign ambassadors struggled to believe what they were hearing. Could England's Queen truly be guilty of such extraordinary crimes? Or was something else happening behind the scenes? The Queen herself was arrested shortly afterward. Without warning, she was escorted through the very palace where she had once been crowned. The same halls that had echoed with music and celebration now stood silent as guards accompanied her away. Her destination carried enormous symbolism. The Tower of London. For centuries, it had served as both royal residence and prison. Kings celebrated victories there. But countless prisoners also entered its gates, never to leave again. As the heavy doors closed behind her, the reality became impossible to ignore. She was no longer treated as England's queen. She was now a prisoner awaiting trial. The investigation moved quickly. Witnesses were questioned. Confessions appeared under mysterious circumstances. Documents were presented before the court. Historians still debate many of the accusations today. Some believe political ambition played a major role. Others argue that fear, personal rivalries, and the desperate desire for a male heir created a perfect storm that destroyed one of England's most remarkable queens. Whatever the complete truth may be, one fact remains certain. The outcome had already begun to take shape long before the trial officially started. Inside her prison chambers, the Queen reportedly remained composed. Those who met her described moments of sadness, but also extraordinary courage. She spent her remaining days praying, writing, and preparing herself for whatever lay ahead. Outside the tower, ordinary people gathered in silence. Many remembered her dazzling coronation. Many remembered the celebrations that welcomed her as England's future. Now they watched in disbelief as that same queen faced the possibility of execution. History was about to witness one of its most unforgettable moments. A woman who had once helped transform the nation now stood alone against the full power of the monarchy she had helped strengthen. And in the next chapter, the final judgment would be delivered. The execution that followed would shock Europe, leave an unforgettable mark on English history, and forever change the meaning of wearing the Tudor crown. The morning of the trial arrived under grey skies, and an uneasy silence settled over London. News had spread quickly that England's queen would stand before a court of nobles to answer charges that could end her life. Crowds gathered outside, hoping to hear any details from inside the courtroom. Some believed justice would prevail. Others feared that the verdict had already been decided long before the proceedings began. Inside the hall, the atmosphere was cold and formal. The Queen entered with remarkable composure. Dressed simply but with unmistakable dignity, she showed none of the panic that many expected. Those present later described how calmly she listened to each accusation, never allowing fear to overcome her in public. The charges against her were extraordinary. She was accused of adultery, betrayal, and even plotting against the king. These were among the most serious crimes imaginable in Tudor England. If found guilty, the punishment would be death. One witness after another appeared before the court. Statements were read aloud. Allegations were repeated. Some testimonies seemed uncertain, while others raised immediate questions. Even today, historians continue to debate whether the evidence was genuine or carefully arranged to remove a queen who had lost political support. When it was finally her turn to speak, the Queen firmly denied every accusation. She declared her loyalty to the king and insisted that she had never betrayed either her marriage or her country. Her words were clear, confident, and unwavering. Yet everyone in the room understood a painful reality. This was no ordinary trial. Politics, power, and personal ambition had become deeply intertwined, making the search for truth almost impossible. After hours of proceedings, the judges delivered their decision. Guilty. The sentence was immediate. Death. A heavy silence filled the courtroom. Even some of those who supported the verdict appeared shaken by its finality. The Queen bowed her head calmly, accepted the judgment without creating a scene, and was escorted back to the Tower of London. There, during her final days, she displayed a level of courage that surprised even her guards. She prayed quietly. She spoke kindly to those around her. She prepared herself for the end with remarkable dignity. Knowing that her daughter would grow up without her was perhaps the greatest sorrow she carried. The little princess, still too young to understand the events unfolding around her, would one day become one of England's greatest monarchs, though no one could imagine that future at the time. As the day of the execution approached, the king made one final decision. Instead of using the traditional executioner's axe, he ordered a skilled swordsman from France to carry out the sentence. A sword was considered faster and, in some ways, more merciful. At dawn, the Queen walked toward the execution platform. Witnesses later recalled how calm she appeared. She did not cry. She did not beg for mercy. Instead, she addressed the crowd with grace and dignity. She avoided criticizing the king and simply asked those present to pray for her soul. Her final words reflected both courage and acceptance, qualities that have fascinated historians for centuries. Moments later, the execution was carried out. In a single instant, the life of one of England's most influential queens came to an end. She was only in her 30s. The woman who had inspired political revolution, challenged centuries of tradition, and changed the course of English history was gone. Yet her story did not end on that platform. The daughter she left behind would eventually ascend the throne as Queen Elizabeth I. Under Elizabeth's rule, England would enter a remarkable period of stability, exploration, cultural achievement, and growing international influence. Ironically, the child whose birth had once disappointed so many would become one of the greatest rulers in British history. Looking back today, Anne Boleyn remains one of history's most debated figures. Was she an ambitious political player? A victim of court intrigue? A courageous reformer? Or simply a woman trapped inside a system that demanded perfection while offering no forgiveness? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere between all of these. One thing is certain. Her life forever changed England's monarchy, its religion, and its future. But the Tudor story was far from over. Because after one queen lost her crown and her life, the king would marry again. And again. And again. Each new marriage would bring fresh hope, new political struggles, and heartbreaking consequences. In the next chapter, we'll follow the next Tudor queen, whose gentle nature briefly restored peace to the royal court, but whose own fate would prove that, in Henry VIII England, even kindness could not guarantee survival. The execution of Anne Boleyn sent shockwaves across England and the rest of Europe. Many believed the crisis inside the royal court was finally over. The king had removed the woman who had become the center of political controversy, and his advisors hoped that peace would soon return to the kingdom. But history had other plans. Only days after Anne's execution, the royal court witnessed another astonishing event. The king announced his engagement to a quiet and gentle noblewoman named Jane Seymour. Unlike Anne, Jane rarely sought attention. She was known for her calm personality, modest behavior, and deep religious faith. She avoided political arguments and preferred a peaceful life away from the spotlight. To many people, Jane represented a fresh beginning. The kingdom desperately wanted stability after years of conflict, and the king hoped his new marriage would finally provide the one thing that had always remained out of reach, a healthy male heir. The wedding was much simpler than previous royal celebrations. There were no extravagant festivals or months of public excitement. Instead, the ceremony reflected the cautious mood of the kingdom. Everyone understood that the success of this marriage would be judged by only one outcome. Would England finally have a prince? Jane understood the enormous responsibility resting on her shoulders. She had witnessed what had happened to the Queen before her. She knew that life inside the palace could change without warning, and she carefully avoided making enemies. Unlike previous queens, Jane rarely involved herself in political matters. She focused on supporting the king, maintaining harmony within the royal household, and rebuilding relationships that had been damaged during years of conflict. One of her first acts earned the respect of many people. She quietly encouraged the king to restore a better relationship with his eldest daughter, Princess Mary. Years of political disagreements had separated father and daughter, but Jane believed that healing old wounds would strengthen the royal family. Although her influence remained gentle rather than forceful, many members of the court admired her compassion. For the first time in years, the atmosphere inside the palace seemed calmer. The endless arguments slowed. The court became less divided. Even foreign ambassadors reported that England appeared more stable than it had in a long time. Then, in early 1537, joyful news spread throughout the kingdom. Queen Jane was expecting a child. Churches offered prayers across England. Bells rang in celebration. People gathered in marketplaces discussing the future with renewed hope. After years of disappointment, many believed destiny was finally smiling upon the Tudor dynasty. The entire kingdom waited anxiously as the months passed. Physicians carefully monitored the Queen's health. The king became increasingly protective, ensuring that every possible precaution was taken. No pregnancy had ever carried greater importance. Finally, in October 1537, the long-awaited moment arrived. After many difficult hours of labor, Jane gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The palace erupted with celebration. Cannons fired. Church bells echoed across England. Bonfires illuminated towns and villages. The newborn prince was named Edward, and at last, the Tudor dynasty had its long-desired male heir. The king was overwhelmed with happiness. For years he had dreamed of this moment. At last, his dynasty appeared secure. But the celebrations would not last long. The difficult birth had taken a terrible toll on the queen. At first, doctors believed she would recover. For several days, there was cautious optimism. Then her condition suddenly worsened. A severe infection spread rapidly through her body, a tragedy that was common in an age before modern medicine. Despite every effort made by royal physicians, nothing could stop the illness. Just 12 days after giving birth to Prince Edward, Queen Jane Seymour died. She was only 28 years old. The entire kingdom fell into mourning. The joy that had filled England only days earlier turned into heartbreak. Even the king, who had rarely shown deep emotion in public, was devastated. Those closest to him later said that Jane was the wife he remembered most fondly. Perhaps it was because she had given him the son he had wanted for so many years. Or perhaps it was because their time together had ended before disappointment and political conflict could destroy their relationship. Whatever the reason, Jane's death left an emptiness inside the royal court. The king wore black for months. The palace became quiet once again. Yet despite his grief, one difficult reality remained. The king was still relatively young. His advisors believed another marriage would strengthen political alliances across Europe and protect England's future. So once again, the search for another queen began. No one could have predicted that the next marriage would become one of the shortest and most unusual in royal history. Because in the next chapter, a portrait painted hundreds of miles away would convince the king to marry a foreign princess, only for the marriage to unravel almost as quickly as it began. The death of Queen Jane Seymour left a silence that echoed throughout the royal palace. For months, the king avoided the celebrations and grand festivities that had once filled his court. He had finally gained the son he had long desired, yet the happiness of that victory had been overshadowed by heartbreaking loss. As time passed, England's political situation became increasingly uncertain. Across Europe, powerful kingdoms were forming new alliances. France and the Holy Roman Empire remained rivals, while religious conflicts continued to reshape the continent. The king's advisors believed England needed stronger diplomatic relationships, and once again, marriage became a political solution. This time, the search extended far beyond England. Royal ambassadors traveled across Europe looking for a suitable princess whose marriage could strengthen England's position. Noble families from several kingdoms became possible candidates, but one name soon attracted particular attention: Anne of Cleves, a German princess from the Duchy of Cleves. Anne came from a respected ruling family whose political connections were considered valuable. Although she had received a traditional education and lived a quiet life away from the excitement of major European courts, she was known for her dignity, kindness, and good reputation. The king, however, faced one unusual problem. He had never met her. Travel across Europe was slow, and arranging meetings between royal families was often difficult. Instead, the king relied on something that had become increasingly important in royal diplomacy: painted portraits. One of England's finest artists was sent to create Anne's likeness. His task was simple but incredibly important: paint an accurate portrait of the princess so the king could judge whether she might become his future queen. When the completed painting arrived in England, the court admired its beauty. The portrait showed a graceful young woman dressed in elegant clothing, wearing a calm and confident expression. The king was pleased. Encouraged by both the painting and the political advantages of the marriage, he agreed to the proposal. Preparations immediately began. Letters crossed Europe. Wedding arrangements were finalized. Anne left her homeland and began the long journey to England, leaving behind everything she had ever known. For weeks she traveled across unfamiliar lands, learning English customs and preparing herself to become queen of a country she had never seen. Meanwhile, excitement quietly returned to the royal court. Many believed this marriage would strengthen England's international position and bring lasting stability after years of political uncertainty. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The king decided to meet and before the official ceremony. According to several historical accounts, he chose to surprise her by arriving in disguise, a romantic tradition popular in medieval stories, where a nobleman would secretly visit his future bride to test whether she recognized him. Reality, however, proved very different from legend, and did not recognize the disguised king. Having never seen him before except through formal descriptions, she treated him as an ordinary stranger. The awkward meeting embarrassed the king. When he later met and formally, he felt disappointed. Whether his reaction resulted from unrealistic expectations, political pressure, or simple lack of personal chemistry remains debated by historians. But one fact became clear almost immediately. The king no longer wished to marry her. Unfortunately, international politics left him with few options. Cancelling the wedding at the last moment risked insulting one of England's important allies. Reluctantly, the marriage ceremony went ahead. Anne became Queen of England. Yet from the very beginning, everyone at court sensed that something was wrong. The king rarely spent time with his new queen. They appeared together only when necessary. The warmth and affection expected from a royal marriage never developed. Privately, advisors searched for a solution that would avoid another national crisis. Fortunately for Anne, she possessed remarkable wisdom. Rather than fighting for power or insisting on remaining queen at all costs, she cooperated with the king's advisors. After careful legal discussions, the marriage was peacefully annulled on the grounds that it had never truly been completed. Unlike the queens before her, Anne accepted the decision with remarkable grace. In return, she received generous estates, financial security, and an honored place within England. She was given the title the king's beloved sister. It was an extraordinary outcome. She lost the crown, but kept her freedom. She survived. In a royal court where several queens had faced imprisonment or execution, Anne of Cleves quietly achieved something few others managed. She lived. She remained respected. And she even maintained a friendly relationship with the king for many years afterward. Yet while Anne quietly stepped away from the throne, another young woman had already begun attracting attention inside the palace. She was charming, cheerful, and much younger than the aging king. Her arrival would bring romance back to the royal court, but it would also lead to another heartbreaking ending. Because in the next chapter, the story of Catherine Howard would prove that youth, beauty, and royal favor could disappear far more quickly than anyone imagined. Anne of Cleves left the royal court with her dignity intact, something that had become incredibly rare in Henry VIII England. Many believed the king had finally learned from the tragedies of his previous marriages. But before long, history began repeating itself once again. Among the ladies serving at court was a young noblewoman named Catherine Howard. She was lively, cheerful, and full of youthful energy. Unlike the older queens who had carried the heavy burden of politics and diplomacy, Catherine brought laughter and excitement back into the royal palace. By this time, King Henry VIII was no longer the strong, athletic prince he had once been. Years of injuries and illness had changed both his health and his personality. He struggled with chronic pain, moved with difficulty, and depended heavily on his advisors. Yet when he met Catherine, something seemed to change. Her youth reminded him of happier days. Her smile brightened the gloomy atmosphere of the court. For the first time in years, the aging king appeared genuinely happy. The relationship moved quickly. Only weeks after his marriage to Anne of Cleves was officially annulled, Henry married Catherine Howard. The court celebrated once again. Music filled the palace halls. Lavish banquets returned. Foreign ambassadors reported that England's king seemed happier than he had been in many years. Henry openly showered his young queen with expensive jewels, magnificent gowns, and priceless gifts. He referred to her as the rose without a thorn, believing she had brought new joy into his life. But behind the glittering celebrations, danger was quietly growing. Catherine was very young and had received far less education than the queens who came before her. She was unfamiliar with the complicated political world surrounding the throne. While she enjoyed the luxury and excitement of palace life, she underestimated how closely every action of a queen was being watched. Nothing remained secret inside the Tudor court. Servants observed everything. Courtiers noticed every conversation. Ambassadors reported every rumor back to Europe. The palace had become a place where even whispered words could become deadly. As months passed, stories about Catherine's past slowly began reaching powerful members of the king's government. Before becoming queen, she had spent time in households where supervision had been less strict than expected for a noblewoman. Old acquaintances began talking. Private relationships from her younger years were suddenly brought into public discussion. At first, the king refused to believe the rumors. He trusted his young queen completely. He dismissed the accusations as malicious gossip created by political enemies. But investigations continued. More witnesses appeared. More letters were discovered. One accusation led to another. Soon, members of the royal council concluded that the evidence could no longer be ignored. The king was devastated. Unlike previous political disputes, this crisis felt deeply personal. Henry had believed he had finally found happiness again. Now he felt betrayed. According to several historical accounts, he was heartbroken when the investigation revealed the extent of the allegations. The cheerful atmosphere inside the palace disappeared overnight. Music stopped. Celebrations ended. The queen, who had once been surrounded by admiration, now found herself isolated. Catherine Howard was arrested and taken into custody. Like Anne Boleyn before her, she entered the Tower of London, not as England's queen, but as a prisoner awaiting judgment. The similarities shocked the kingdom. Once again, England watched another young queen face accusations that carried the ultimate punishment. During her imprisonment, Catherine reportedly became overwhelmed with fear. Unlike Anne Boleyn, who had faced her trial with remarkable confidence, Catherine was still incredibly young. Many accounts describe her as frightened and deeply aware of the fate that likely awaited her. After weeks of investigation, Parliament declared her guilty. The sentence was unavoidable. Execution. On the morning of February 13, 1542, Catherine Howard was led to the execution platform inside the Tower of London. Witnesses later described her as pale but composed. She accepted responsibility for her mistakes and prepared herself for the end. Moments later, another queen lost her life beneath the executioner's blade. She was believed to be no more than 20 years old. Her death stunned England. It served as another painful reminder that inside the Tudor court, beauty, youth, and even the king's affection offered no lasting protection. The palace that promised wealth and power had now claimed the lives of two queens. Fear returned to every hallway. Every noble family understood that royal favor could disappear without warning. Yet despite these tragedies, the king's search for stability was still not over. Age was catching up with Henry VIII. His health continued to decline. His kingdom needed peace more than ever. One final marriage remained. And unlike the women before her, the last Tudor queen would survive, not through ambition or romance, but through intelligence, patience, and extraordinary wisdom. In the next and final chapter, we'll meet Catherine Parr, the queen who outlived Henry VIII and helped shape the future of England after one of history's most turbulent reigns came to an end. By the time Henry VIII prepared to marry for the sixth and final time, he was no longer the confident young king who had once dazzled Europe. Years of illness had transformed him into a ruler burdened by constant pain. Walking had become difficult, his temper had grown unpredictable, and many of those closest to him realized that the end of his reign was approaching. England had also changed dramatically. The kingdom had broken away from Rome. Religious divisions had spread across the country. Political rivalries remained intense, and everyone understood that the future of the Tudor dynasty depended upon what happened after the king's death. In the middle of this uncertainty stood Catherine Parr. Unlike Henry's previous wives, Catherine was not an inexperienced teenager. She was an intelligent, well-educated widow who had already experienced both marriage and loss. She loved books, enjoyed theological discussions, and believed that learning could strengthen both individuals and nations. When Henry proposed marriage, Catherine accepted, not because she dreamed of becoming queen, but because she understood the enormous responsibility that came with the position. From the very beginning, she approached the role differently. She did not seek political power for herself. She did not compete for influence at court. Instead, she focused on creating stability within the royal family. Perhaps her greatest achievement was rebuilding relationships between the king and his children. For years, Prince Edward, Princess Mary, and Princess Elizabeth had lived through family conflicts that few children could fully understand. Catherine encouraged reconciliation, treating all three with kindness and respect. Gradually, the royal household became more united than it had been in decades. Her influence extended beyond family life. She supported education, encouraged the translation of religious writings into English, and even published her own devotional work, making her one of the first English queens to publish a book under her own name. But intelligence inside the Tudor court could be dangerous. Some powerful advisors believed Catherine's interest in religious reform had gone too far. They accused her of discussing controversial ideas with scholars and clergy. Secret meetings were held. Documents were prepared. For a brief period, plans were even made to arrest the Queen on charges of religious heresy. Once again, it seemed that another Tudor queen might face a tragic ending. Fortunately, Catherine possessed remarkable wisdom. When she learned that powerful enemies were turning the king against her, she acted immediately. Instead of confronting Henry, she spoke to him with humility and respect. She explained that their religious conversations had never been attempts to challenge his authority. Rather, she said, they were simply discussions meant to distract him from the pain of his illness and to stimulate thoughtful conversation. The explanation worked. The king's anger disappeared almost instantly. When officials later arrived with orders to arrest the Queen, Henry reportedly became furious, not with Catherine, but with the advisors who had tried to manipulate him. The arrest was cancelled. For the first time in many years, a queen had escaped political destruction through wisdom instead of luck. As Henry's health continued to decline, Catherine remained faithfully by his side. She managed the royal household. She cared for the king during his illness. And when Henry travelled abroad on military campaigns, she even served as regent of England, temporarily governing the kingdom in his absence. It was an extraordinary responsibility, and one she carried with remarkable competence. Finally, on January 28, 1547, Henry VIII died at the age of 55. His reign had lasted nearly 38 years. It was one of the most dramatic reigns in English history. He had married 6 times. He had transformed England's religion. He had expanded royal authority. And he had forever changed the course of the nation. After his death, young Edward VI became king, with Catherine Parr stepping away from royal life. For the first time in years, she was free to make her own choices. She later remarried the man she had loved before becoming queen, finally finding a measure of personal happiness. Sadly, that happiness was brief. In 1548, Catherine died from complications shortly after giving birth to her only child. She became the last of Henry VIII's 6 wives to pass away. Yet unlike so many who came before her, she left behind a legacy not of scandal or tragedy, but of wisdom, compassion, and education. Ending. The story of the Tudor queens is far more than a collection of royal marriages. It is a story of extraordinary women who lived in a world where love was often political, loyalty could vanish overnight, and a crown offered prestige, but never safety. Some changed the course of religion. Some secured the royal bloodline. Some lost everything. And one raised the future queen who would lead England into its golden age. Today, centuries later, their portraits still hang in castles and museums, frozen in time beneath jeweled crowns and elegant gowns. But behind every portrait was a real woman, with hopes, fears, dreams, and impossible choices. Their lives remind us that history is not only shaped by kings who wore the crown, but also by the queens who carried its heaviest burdens. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into Tudor history, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which Tudor queen story surprised you the most?